All right, well, welcome to episode number 21 of the Oklahoma Weather Show. Today, May 28th, getting to the very end of June, we have had, or very end of May, getting in towards June, we have had very little severe weather this past month, which has been great. We finally picked up some much-needed rainfall across the state. Some parts of the state seeing more rain in the last 5 and 6 days than they've probably seen in the last 4 to 6 months. So that leads us to today's guest. This is our first repeat guest that we've had on our show. We liked him so much back in January that we wanted to bring Gary McManus back on. Again, he's the state climatologist right here in Oklahoma. Gary, let's just jump straight into what this show is about. How did this past week's rainfall help the state out as far as the drought goes?
Well, it really depends on where you're at. Now, if you're in southwestern Oklahoma and up into parts of northeastern Oklahoma, it helped you out tremendously. Parts of southwestern Oklahoma, which really has been hurt the worst by this drought over the last 3.5 to 4 years. It's kind of a battle between southwestern Oklahoma and the Panhandle, but they got widespread areas of rain from 3 to 5 inches. So great short-term help for that part of the state. Also up around the Tulsa area, and some areas got from 2 to 4 inches of rainfall. Other parts of the state not quite so lucky. If you go up to northwestern Oklahoma, north central Oklahoma, down in south central Oklahoma, they got from maybe 1/4 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch. So it depends on where you're at, but in general, it's one of our best rainfalls over a large area that we've seen really since last fall.
I was happy to see, and this may have been the first time that a lot of people were okay to probably have to go indoors from time to time for the Memorial Day weekend. Southwest Oklahoma. Last week we were talking to Lloyd Colston from Altus, and one of the last questions I asked him was, are you excited for what's coming in this weekend, or are you in the mindset of it's a wait and see because I've gotten my hopes up so many times and it's never come through? Down in Altus right now, looking at your all's Mesonet app right now, 3.5, 3.6 inches of rain. Looks like some Doppler radar estimates up around 4 inches of rain. What will that do? I know the drought was so bad down there. So you talk about short-term improvement. What kind of short-term improvements are we talking about here? Are we talking about a little rise in the lake levels, or is this more so going straight into the soil?
Well, it's a combination of both. Now, unfortunately, it's a very small rise in the lake levels. Lake Tom Steed, which is their main drinking supply, it's probably going to go up maybe a 1/2 of a foot, so maybe 6 inches to 9 inches. So whatever fell in that area is how much the lake's going to go up. So instead of being 21% of normal capacity, maybe there'll be 22 or 23% of normal capacity. So this was not an end to the long-term drought situation down in southwestern Oklahoma. However, some very important short-term impacts will definitely be improved. One of the things that we'll see that we've been missing out on, not only in southwestern Oklahoma but over a lot of the state, will be a greening up of the vegetation, which will end or largely end a lot of that wildfire danger, at least for a short duration. Now, we're going to have to wait and see if we get reinforcing rainfalls that can keep that vegetation green. But that's one of the reasons why we've seen that wildfire danger, which normally ends right around early spring, continue into late spring because it's been so dry. Just haven't had a chance to green things up and eliminate the fuel for those wildfires. So we'll see improvements due to that. It's probably too late for things like the wheat crop. Unfortunately, we're going to see one of our lowest harvests probably since the 1950s. So very bad news for the wheat crop. It's a very resilient crop, but it's past the point of being helped by rainfall probably, and also the canola crop. But we'll see some important agricultural impacts, moistened up the soils. So we'll see maybe a cutting of hay or two due to this moisture. Hopefully, they'll be able to plant some of their summer crops, so the cotton crop will be helped, hopefully. And that's, just in those select areas. Other parts of the state, it's just drought continuing. But I think for the very short term, the most important thing we'll see is a green up of the vegetation.
Gary, I have a question for you about the lake levels. You were talking about, obviously, Lake Tom Steed, Lake Altus, up about a half a foot. I noticed, too, because I looked at this yesterday, Kent Lake up a couple inches. And if anything, a lot of these lakes, rather than really rising up, they just kind of ceased to fall any further. They just leveled off. What type of rain does it take to really see a reversal? Some of these lakes, I mean, we're down to 20% water in Canton, 10% water in Lake Altus, but then I understand Altus has been without any water in it for a long, long time.
Right.
What type of rainfall do we need to see some of our reservoirs in western Oklahoma to start to fill up a little bit?
Well, you can get it in two different ways. You can either get about 12 inches in one setting in about 6 hours. That'll do wonders for filling up a lake. We saw that with Lake Hefner last year on May 31st and Lake Overholser. Or you can get an extended period of moderate rainfall like we just saw. Unfortunately, when you do it in the latter way, the moderate rainfall over a longer period of time, it really takes a lot longer because you have to moisten up those soils first. Once you get the soils moistened up, then you get more runoff, and then there are other things that will rob the reservoirs of that moisture. You have farm ponds and streams that'll take that moisture up first, and so they will rob some of that flow into the lakes and reservoirs. And so again, I think you would rather have it the moderate way with the tropical style range where it comes over a period of 5 to 6 days like we just saw, rather than the lake full in a single day like we've seen like last May 31st where so many people died due to the flash flooding. But in general, what we like to say as climatologists is the drought, and especially the long-term impacts such as the lower levels in the reservoirs, it's a long-term problem. And it's generally a long-term solution. But, like I said, we saw the lakes in central Oklahoma and eastern Oklahoma fill up in a short period of time last year, so it can happen. It's just there are adverse byproducts that comes with that way.
We talk about these lakes filling up, and one of the lakes that has really surprised me is Fort Supply Lake up near your old stomping grounds there, Gary.
You bet.
How is that lake? If unless it's a typo, I'm reading that it's pretty much full. Is it not?
Yeah, and it's stayed full. It's a different type of lake up there. It's managed very closely. Not much water is ever let out of the spillway there to go down the Canadian. And also, you could probably walk across that lake, not as in Jesus style, but as in you can walk across without going below water and at some point. So it's a very shallow lake, and it's very easy to fill up. It's got a good inflow into it. But it's that area is one area that needs a lot of rainfall in order to see a lake like Canton fill up. So whatever falls upstream from Canton up around the Woodward, Fort Supply, Sealing area, that's what they will get down into the Canton area. So that's why Canton has remained so low, is because they haven't been getting the rainfall up in the northwest. Now again, Fort Supply has stayed up pretty well over the last year or two, but that's sort of a specially managed lake. It's kind of like Lake Arcadia up in Edmond, which has been overflowing forever. So the lakes, it's kind of tricky to track the lake levels and try and determine drought unless you know exactly what's going on with the management of those lakes. And that's one of the things about Lake Altus. It's down to 10 to 11% of normal, but we also have to remember that's a major irrigation lake for the cotton crop down there. So it probably wouldn't be quite so low if it wouldn't have been used for irrigation back before it started to go dry. So it really depends upon each lake and each lake's situation.
Yeah, each lake is quite unique. It surprises me to look at Lake Hefner because we can look outside our tower cam and we have it pointed to the lake and to see the shoreline there. Do we have a problem with our lakes here, or do you think that we're doing pretty well as far as keeping them full?
Well, I think I saw the whole Oklahoma City water supply, so it encompasses Canton, Overholser, Hefner, and then Lake Atoka, and I believe a couple other lakes. I think it's about 54% or somewhere around that area. So you have Lake Hefner is about 7 to 8 feet below normal. I think Overholser's 5 to 6 feet below normal. But remember, it's being used by Oklahoma City, so it's less evaporation right now. But the thing is that you're not going to have Canton to fall back on this year. So if we do see a drought like we did last year, which started right about this time, April, May, we started to go down, and then by the time we got around December, January, Hefner was, a ghost town basically of a lot of sailboats setting up on the dry land. So that's when Oklahoma City took the Canton water. So you're not going to have that water available. So I think that's why that Oklahoma City went ahead and went to permanent water rationing or water conservation methods, the odd even watering and things of that nature. So it looks okay for now, but summer's just right around the corner. Our maximum evaporation rates are just around the corner. And Oklahoma City didn't get the large amounts of rainfall that other parts did. And even those lakes, didn't come up very much that did get the good rain. So I still urge caution for any place in Oklahoma that's relying on one of those lakes for its water supply, because we are so close to the summer months and our maximum evaporation periods.
How much rain do you think we need statewide? Let's go western Oklahoma first, since I know that the drought is worse out there. How much rain do you think we need to get out of both an agriculture drought and a hydrological drought?
Oh boy, that's really tough to say. The deficits that we look at when we look at the beginning of this drought all the way back to late fall of 2010 are in western Oklahoma. They're from anywhere from 30 to 50 inches in some cases. So 30 to 50 inch water deficits or rainfall deficits since the last 3.5 years. So you don't need 30 to 50 inches of rainfall to get completely out of drought, but you do need an extended period of above normal rainfall. I'm not talking just like this May and June and July. I'm talking 2014, 2015 type of time scales of above normal rainfalls. Cut down on a lot of that extreme heat, hopefully with additional rainfalls, and moisten up the soils, and then you can start to come out of that long-term hydrologic drought. Of course, you can really improve the short-term drought conditions, the things agriculturally that we see. So we could have a really good wheat crop next year. That's a short-term impact. You can fill up those farm ponds much quicker or much more quickly than you can Lake Tom Steed or Lake Canton and Foss Lake and all those lakes out in western Oklahoma. So whenever you say how much do you need, the most lame answer I can give is you need enough rainfall to alleviate both those short-term and long-term conditions. And that's a case-by-case basis in each part of the state, and that's why we spend so much time at the beginning of each week looking at the conditions from all these different indicators and trying to determine the best drought monitor map on the U.S. Drought Monitor. And so there's not really an easy answer. We just need, we've had 3.5 to 4 years of below normal rainfalls. Now we need a couple years of above normal rainfalls.
Gary, you talk a lot about climate change, and I know you've looked at Oklahoma weather for quite a while. You've studied it, being a climatologist since, is it 99?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, you've spoke a lot about climate change. For folks wondering, is this an indicator? Is this a short-term weather phenomena, or do you think this is something, the lack of rain and the drought-stricken areas, is that something we're going to see more of in the future?
If you look at the history of the precipitation patterns in Oklahoma, you see these longer-term droughts in our past, the 19-teens, the 1930s, 1950s. The 1950s through the 1970s, you had many more drier than normal years than you did wetter than normal years. So right now, you would look at this current drought situation, especially across western Oklahoma, and you would probably think, it's just part of our normal wet, dry pattern that we've seen in our past. Now, you can't really say right now that it's not part of some longer-term drying out pattern due to some sort of climate change. That's really something that would have to come into the future, and you take a look back and see, was this an increase in frequency of drought, drought intensification, drought severity, drought frequency? So that type of indication has not been determined yet, and it won't be for quite some time. But if you just look at the last 30 to 40 years, really we had an extended period of wet weather from 1980 through basically the 2000s. So that was a 30-year anomalous wet period that we went through, probably due to just our oceanic temperature patterns. We had a very favorable period of a positive PDO, so we had lots of El Niños occurring, and we had lots of luscious green countryside here in Oklahoma throughout that period. Whereas if you look at the previous 25-year period from like 50 to 75, that was when we had that negative PDO, and we had the cool phase of the or the anomalous phase of the AMO. Now, all these acronyms get a little mixed up. So the oceanic patterns have been favorable in the previous 30 years for above normal rainfall, and now it looks like we've sort of been in an extended period of unfavorable oceanic patterns. And so right now we would just chalk this up to looking at the oceanic patterns and what they're doing to sort of influence our weather. But again, you can't really determine yet whether this is the part or the start of a longer-term change in our weather due to climate change. Again, that research will have to come in the future.
You know, I last week talking to Lloyd Colston, he's a big fan of yours, Gary. He said, you know, quote, Gary said the drought will end eventually. We don't know exactly when, but we know this drought will eventually end. As far as, you know, we talk a lot about drought, and Brad brought up a really good topic last week about saying, you know, we do a blog on a drought and it doesn't get that many clicks. It's not as sexy of a story to talk about compared to if we talk about severe weather. And I think the reason why probably a drought story doesn't carry that much weight for those of us that live in the city is because we look outside our window, you know, we see the grass is green. A lot of people tend to not travel outside of the city to see just exactly how the drought is impacting those who rely on water so much. So what can you tell us as far as, you know, for those people that just travel up and down the highways every single day and they don't see what the drought is doing to this state, what exactly is the drought doing to this state for those people that don't happen to see it all the time?
Well, for one thing, it's doing huge damage to our economy. The agricultural economy in Oklahoma is a major part of our economy, just like oil and gas. So when you have a drought of the magnitude that we've had the last 3 to 4 years, you know, you look at the damages done 2011, 2012, just in agriculture alone, the damages were over $2 billion as estimated by Oklahoma State University. And that's not counting what happened in 2013 and then again this year, where we're going to have a huge devastation of our wheat crop. So we're going to have much more damage occurring. So that's billions of dollars out of our economy. Now, there are relief programs to those farmers, so there is some help there, but it doesn't make up for all that lost money. And that damage to the economy filters all the way through the small towns that serve those farmers all the way up to the state capitol where the taxes are collected. And then again, that's just agriculture. We're not talking about other damages that occur due to the droughts. Things like industry that needs this water. So the oil and gas industry, they need the water for fracking and things of that nature. So a lot of water is needed there. If that water becomes unavailable, what are they going to do? And also tourism. You know, back in the summer of 2011 and also back in 2012, you didn't have a lot of people going to visit Oklahoma lakes. One, because it was so hot in 2011. People just didn't want to get outdoors as much, and in 2012 there weren't really many lakes to go to because everything was so dry. So you have huge implications to this drought. And remember, just think of your fellow Oklahomans. Maybe you're not impacted by the drought as much But for people in Oklahoma City, for instance, the water that was taken from Lake Canton back in December or January of 2013, that pretty much decimated the economy of that little town of Canton, which relies upon tourism for its economy. And so those are your fellow Oklahomans that are hurting due to this drought. So if Canton was devastated by a tornado, just like you said, there would be endless relief efforts ongoing out in that area, and there would be national coverage. But losing their lake, not quite so much coverage, and that's just the nature of the beast, as if you want to put it that way. The severe weather is much more, in quotes, sexy than something like drought. But when you look at the larger scale of drought, so not just Oklahoma, but when it becomes like what we saw in 2012, and it was the entire Midwest was in drought, then you start to feel it in your pocketbook at the grocery store and in other areas. So, you might go out here in the city and turn on the spigot and water comes out, but remember, eventually you will be impacted. You've already been impacted by water restrictions. You're not supposed to water every single day. So if the drought continues and you start to see the lakes go down in Oklahoma City once again, you might be dealing with a brown lawn, which you don't like. That's just one of the minor ways you might be impacted.
Gary, you were saying that this year will be a huge, devastating loss for our wheat crop. You said that just a moment ago. What are we talking about? What type of losses could the state see as a result of the dramatic weather and the drought this year for our wheat crop?
Well, the wheat crop ends up being worth anywhere from, I'm not an agricultural economist, of course, but from what I've seen, the wheat crop is worth anywhere from several $100 million to $1 billion each year to the economy of Oklahoma. That's how much the wheat, and it depends upon prices and things like that, of course. But when you see the estimates that were put out by the USDA of about 60 million bushels of wheat are possibly expected this year, when our normal harvest is over 100 million bushels, 120 and somewhere in that area. That's the loss of half of a wheat crop. So let's just ballpark it and say the loss of $300 to $500 million. Now, again, there are relief programs for those farmers. But again, it's not just the wheat crop. It's also the canola, it's the feed, and we've had a huge reduction over the last 3 to 4 years in the state's cattle herds. So these long-term generational cattle herds have basically been liquidated all across western Oklahoma because there hasn't been feed. The farm ponds are all dry, and so when you look at the agricultural damages, they just continue to mount. They're going to go up this year. I'm sure that we'll see updated estimates from Oklahoma State eventually, where we'll have hundreds of millions of dollars, if not another billion or two, added to those previous estimates of $2 billion from just the 2011-2012 drought. So if you think this doesn't impact you, it may not when you go outside again and turn on the spigot and water comes out and you take your long shower or whatever. But it's definitely doing damage to Oklahoma's economy.
$2 billion. I mean, that's the more tornado damage right there. And I mean, it's not as obvious. We're not seeing it, and I don't think it's getting the media coverage that it deserves. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Right, and it's not one of the things that people say with the difference between tornadoes and severe weather and droughts. And the tornado killed, the Moore tornado killed 24 people, and the May 31st killed another 20-some people or somewhere in there with the tornado damage and also the flooding. But we know it's a scientific fact that stress and other things impact people's health. So imagine you're trying to make your living out there in western Oklahoma dealing with this drought and how much stress you're undergoing. The amount of stress you're undergoing is definitely impacting your health, it's no doubt causing, you know, I hate to say this, premature death with some of the older generations that are dealing with this. It's a subject that I've seen just being bandied about. That's being more and more looked at and studied. The types of stress that the agricultural communities undergo when they're under drought or adverse weather conditions. So imagine what you feel just in one day with a high risk day of tornadoes for your family. Well, this is what those folks out across western Oklahoma, and I'm not forgetting the rest of the state, anybody that makes their living in agriculture, this is what the types of stress they've been feeling, you know, almost every single day for the last 3.5 to 4 years. So it's not just the monetary damage; it's also damages to the mental health of the people under.
Is it possible, Gary, to have a perfect crop? I mean, you know, you're obviously going to have losses every year. So when we say $2 billion, is it ever possible to not have that? I mean, with it being Oklahoma as it is, I mean.
Oh, you bet. You know, if you look at the harvest numbers as you go back, the 80s through the 2000s were some really great harvests during that period, and that was when we had those wonderfully wet years. And even last year, the wheat crop ended up being pretty good. Basically, really it recovered from the drought from October through mid-February, and the rains. From mid-February through May really saved that crop, and we actually had a pretty decent crop. So you do still have good crops in Oklahoma. It's just whenever you start to get in these longer-term drought situations, you make things a little bit more dicey. And of course, it matters when that rains, when it rains, and also when the drought occurs. If you get good rains in October, September, October, go through a drought through the winter, and then you get some good rains as you come out into the spring in April and May, you can still get a pretty good wheat crop because of the life cycle of that wheat. It's just, you know, what were the exact conditions that occurred. It just so happens that they were able to plant a crop last fall, but once that wheat crop comes out of dormancy into the spring, there was no moisture available, and in fact the conditions it did see, especially in January and March and April, were lots of extremely windy days with very low relative humidities, and not even really a lot of heat, but just a lot of damaging weather to that wheat crop.
Gary, what happened to our wheat crop from this late freeze, that hard freeze that we had back in April?
Yeah, there were actually a couple of really damaging freezes that, again, you know, if you look at the damage to the wheat crop due to drought, it was probably 2 parts drought, 1 part freeze. So the freeze damage can also do a lot of monetary damage to the wheat, and so that was definitely a part of it. And we've seen that in the past. The 2007 wheat crop had a very bad late freeze in April and late March, and also the 2009 wheat crop was damaged by freeze. And then, if you'll remember, the 2007 crop, during June, perfect harvest time, it rained almost every single day in June. So the wheat crop just sat out in the field and rotted because the farmers couldn't get the combines out into the field to harvest it. So being a farmer is a pretty dicey situation because you can get not enough rain and you can get too much rain, and it all depends upon the timing.
You talk about some serious stress going on with that profession. I mean, you know, I listen to Ag PH radio or Ag PhD radio on satellite every now and then, and even those areas up in the northern plains and the upper Midwest that aren't dealing with as nasty of a drought as we have down here, even they're still running into problems. It seems that every year there's a new problem that you have to account for when it comes to the ag business, whether you're putting down enough nitrogen in your field, whether you're having some type of soil root going on, or whatever it is. So you really got to shake the hands of the farmers out here, because as much stress as they are put under on everyday weather, they keep coming back year after year. So are wheat prices going to change much? I know you say you don't deal a whole lot with the whole economic side of ag business here. But do you think we're going to see a big change in our grocery prices in the coming months because of this drought?
I don't think so, and you know I'm certainly immersed in the agricultural community. I give drought talks to ag folks all the time, and I get all their emails and sit in on their talks and listen a lot. So what I hear is that, you know, wheat is a worldwide commodity. So a drought here in the southern plains of the United States does not impact the worldwide wheat prices, and so that filters down to Oklahoma. Whoever does have wheat to harvest, their prices are going to be due to what's happening across the world, not just here in the southern plains or even in the Midwest. It's a little bit different though for the cattle. You know, the United States is one of the major cattle producers in the world, and so beef prices are much more in tune attuned to what's going on with weather here in the Midwest and the Great Plains. So wheat, I don't think we're going to see, due to our drought, a lot of high prices, because it really depends on what's going on across the world.
What do you think we're going to see this summer? More heat, less heat? Too soon to say?
As a climatologist, it's always safe to say Oklahoma's going to have a hot summer, because we generally have two types of summers in Oklahoma. It's generally hot, or it's really, really hot. If there's drought in place and we don't get much rainfall through the summer, you usually end up having a pretty extreme heat in Oklahoma. Maybe not exactly 2011 summer type heat, which was, of course, the hottest summer for any state in the United States history. Yeah, we lived through that one. There was definitely extreme drought. But if you have drought somewhere around, and you have that soil moisture starting to get a little bit low, well, you know, it's just basic physics. More of that sun's energy and the sun's rays go to just heating the Earth's surface instead of evaporating soil moisture or being used by plants if your plants go dormant and die. So we have a couple to 3 weeks left to get some pretty good rainfall in our normal rainy pattern. But otherwise, we're going to go into the summer this year with a pretty significant drought in place across parts of Oklahoma. So where that drought is the worst, we're probably going to see some pretty high temperatures. And of course, it depends on what the upper air patterns do, which if we do see that extended period of that upper level high that sits over the top of us, we'll get definitely more extreme heat than normal because of the drought. But I would look for a 2012 type of a situation where it's not exactly 2011, but it was a pretty hot summer. Again, if we don't get some really good rainfall over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and that's where folks like Damon and you guys come in, where you can tell us, you know, how much rain we going to get in the next 5 to 10 days, and it doesn't exactly look like we're going to be eradicating the drought over the next week or two.
Yeah, looking at the Arctic Oscillation, at least coming in for the next month, you know, you see it kind of. It looks like it wants to maintain a little bit of troughiness out here in the plains and east of the Rockies, but not a whole lot. At this point, I mean, I'm hoping for something tropical, you know, a tropical storm to come in here. As much as I hate to say that, you know, the floods need to come, I really think the floods need to come.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the latest outlooks just came out in the last few days. I think due to El Nino, probably looks like almost a certainty now. And El Nino is going to develop, which suppresses the Atlantic hurricane activity or tropical activity. So that would lessen our chances, you would think, just a little bit of getting tropical activity. But some of our rainiest periods on record in our past have come due to the intrusion of Pacific tropical systems. Now, we don't, of course, those systems don't survive with their moisture intact as they get over move over the mountains and they get all kerflooey and everything. But once they do make it over the mountains, and if they can interact with the frontal system over this part of the world, we get a lot of moisture return from the Gulf. We've again seen some of our wettest periods in history due to Pacific tropical systems, and the Pacific tropics are expected to be a little bit higher, more activity in the Pacific tropical region. So, you know, whichever side it comes from whichever side of the Rockies, you know, it would definitely help us. And we remember back in 2011, we had a really nice tropical system approaching the Gulf Coast on down there in Texas, right at the height of the drought where it was so bad, and it hit the coast and just completely evaporated. One of the people in Texas had said they had never seen such a thing occur. So of course, you know, the tropical system would have to survive up this way. But those are awfully wonderful for ending drought in Oklahoma, as are longer-term El Nino periods.
You think this El Nino that's setting up, because it seems that, you know, we really don't feel the effects of El Nino until the winter time.
Right.
Do you think that this El Nino will be one of the more memorable ones, or do you think that this is just going to be one that kind of drifts in here, you know, kind of slowly? What do you think?
Boy, from what I've seen with a lot of the worldwide expertise on ENSO or El Nino and La Nina oscillations, a lot of folks are starting to talk more and more about how this looks like a really strong El Nino, like much like the 1997-98 event. So if that does occur, in general, if we get a really strong El Nino, that means wet, cool season for Oklahoma. So October through March, April, we would have a much greater chance to be wetter than normal here in Oklahoma. And it's now, the impacts are much more important for parts south of here down in Texas. But during those really strong El Ninos, we definitely see an impact. And if it was a 1997-98 type El Nino, which again, a lot of the experts are just sort of hinting right now that it does look that way. So it's much too early. I'm not predicting it, of course. Don't come back on me if it doesn't occur. But that 97-98 winter or the cool season, if you look at October through March, it was, I believe, our third wettest such period on record. So that can do a world of good for priming your spring systems for ending drought completely. So if we can get a really wet, cool season, and we're not talking snow, we're just talking moisture of any type. We can't predict what form it would fall in. But if you can get those antecedent spring conditions to be really moist, well, then when you come out into spring, you have a lot more room to work with, and you can really do a good job of eradicating drought across this part of the country.
You know, it's really challenging sometimes because, especially now with the way that social media is and Facebook and Twitter and the way that some people are writing out stories. I was reading about the potential that this El Nino could be quite strong, but you have to really be careful with where you get your weather information from, because some of these titles are made for you to click on them, and the next thing you know it, you're reading someone's blog that doesn't have any scientific background on it. So I'm glad to hear that, you know, you were mentioning that, you know, with the credibility, because I would love to see a 97-98 El Nino, you know, certainly set up. What do you think as we go into at least the next couple months? You know, for Oklahomans, and I know you mentioned, you know, we're probably going to see a couple 100-degree days. Do you think that it's going to be isolated as far as here in the plains, or do you think that we're going to see this heat just kind of expand across much of the middle of America here? This drought seems to, that I've noticed, it seems that, you know, southeastern Oklahoma, they get into the 80s, 90s, and western Oklahoma is about 105 degrees. Do you think all of Oklahoma is going to have widespread heat, or do you think it's just going to be, you know, confined out to the west?
Well, in general, it's usually confined out to the west. Now, of course, the heat index would be higher out there in the eastern part of the state, and we saw that in 2011, 2012. It just really depends on what happens with the rainfall. If the eastern parts of the state, and they have pretty good conditions right now, not perfect, of course, they do have drought expanding over into that area, but if they continue to get rainfall and keep that soil moisture up and keep their plants nice and green, they won't have as bad a time as we would across western Oklahoma, again, if the drought continues. And it seems like this is more of a 2011 style drought, where it's more confined to the southern plains. So look for more heat in the southern plains, I think. But you know, between now, which is the end of May, through June, you can really set up a lot of heat by not having any June rainfall, because June really, is very close to being our wettest month of record now. And so, in fact, in some parts of the state, it is our wettest month normally. So whatever happens between now and the next 2 to 3 weeks can really set the tone for what type of summer we have. But, like last summer, we continued to get rainfall through mid-August, and it stayed pretty benign. Actually, a really cool summer, and one of those just hot summers, not really, really hot summers. It's just really too early to tell, but in general, it correlates with the rainfall. So if it continues to rain somewhat through the summer, we can keep those temperatures down. And I think that goes not only for Oklahoma, and not just western Oklahoma, but eastern Oklahoma as well. Remember in 2012, as the rains that started to die off in May, eastern Oklahoma zoomed back into drought in the next 3 to 4 months. So it can happen pretty quickly. It's a flash drought situation.
Speaking of drought, what do you think changes with tomorrow's drought monitor? Anything?
Oh yeah, I'm the person that actually sends that information into the U.S. Drought Monitor. I'm the so-called local expert, which is very scary. And I send in the bulk of that information and try and get our drought monitor changed. We will see improvements across parts of Oklahoma. We could have actually degraded or worsened the drought in parts of the state, but we wanted to wait and see what the upper level low did for the rest of the week. But there were parts of the state down in south central Oklahoma up in north central Oklahoma that have seen that drought continue to intensify even through this last 7-day period. Bernieville and parts of the state down there in south central Oklahoma, they got less than a 1/4 inch of rainfall, and places like Medford, they got less than a 1/2 inch of rainfall. So the drought continues intensifying in some parts of the state, but at least for those areas that we mentioned earlier, they will see some drought improvements in the drought monitor.
I always look forward to that coming out. So basically, the D5 category, is that going to expand? Is that going to grow, or is that going to stay as is?
Right, the D4 you mean?
Or D4, I'm sorry, yeah, D4.
Some people want to add a D5 with what's happened with Texas and Oklahoma over the last 3 to 4 years, and so that's been talked about actually. So maybe some foreshadowing there on your part. But the D4 will decrease a little bit in areas that we felt that the greatest short-term impacts were relieved. It's not going to be as wide as most people would probably expect, because if you look at the rainfall over the longer period, just May itself, May is going to actually end up being one of our 30 driest Mays on record, even with this big burst of moisture over the last week. And the year-to-date for Oklahoma statewide is still going to be one of our second or third driest on record, January through May. So, it was a very nice burst of moisture for parts of the state that really needed it, but for a large area of the state, the drought continues to march on, and if we don't get reinforcing rainfalls over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be right back into intensifying that drought across larger parts of Oklahoma.
So, any changes across Oklahoma City with the drought monitor?
No, I know that this wasn't enough. With what we've seen since the beginning of the year, Oklahoma City facing one of its driest January through Mays on record. There really wasn't enough widespread rainfall. Now, last night or yesterday's rainfall might have made a little bit of difference if we had seen that before the Tuesday morning cutoff. But Oklahoma City looks to be about the same as what it was, with just a little bit of improvement, but not enough to up it a category.
Brad, Jonathan, anything y'all want to add?
By the way, I'm not supposed to tell anybody what the newest drought monitor is going to look like, so be sure and keep that to yourselves.
Well, I feel privileged. I feel like I have some type of insider information that, wow, I feel like I could do some amazing damage here. I'd say I know that we talk a lot about drought, and again, drought is one of those stories that I think we try to push out there, and sadly, it just doesn't get the type of clicks and the type of likes that it should. I know that probably this summer unless something crazy happens, we're dealing with more heat. Do you have anything you want to plug? Open mic for the next 1 or 2 minutes.
Not really. Just visit our Mesonet site. All that heat you can track day to day. If you want to be miserable in the summer and look at what your temperature is, hour by hour or 5 minute by 5 minute time periods, just look at our Oklahoma Mesonet site. That's www.mesonet.org. That's mesonet.org. And then you can get our climate side. So more of the long-term drought maps and things like that, just at climate.ok.gov. We have all that stuff available, and so if you want to see how we're looking since the beginning of the year with our rainfall, you can get that on the climate side. And if you want to get up to the 5 minute period weather in your area, you can start to look at the Mesonet side. And we also have Mesonet apps for Android and iPhone, so you can find those on the various sites, and that's great stuff if you're out somewhere out and about and you want to track the weather. I know we're competing with you on that, but we're just your local friendly government entity giving out good information, and we definitely appreciate the work that you folks in the media do as well.
Hey, we pay you for that, for access to that Mesonet stuff, so it's important to us.
Yeah.
We definitely need it. Yeah, I mean the Mesonet app, as a matter of fact, it might be one of my favorite apps that I use, and I think sometime this summer we're going to do a show on weather apps. But my wife always makes fun of me because, well, first off, she calls it the Mesonet, and I keep having to correct her. No, it's the Mesonet, but I'm always checking it, and especially it's by far probably the best Mesonet system out there I've seen. I was up in Iowa a couple weeks ago. They have a pretty good setup there as well. But you all are doing some wonderful things down there.
We're still the gold standard. We won all the major awards, and all the Mesonets across the country and really the world look towards the Oklahoma Mesonet. It's really an undiscovered gem to most Oklahomans. They don't realize what they have with the Mesonet. It's a world-renowned, probably the most world-renowned mesoscale measuring or weather measuring network. So this is something that we provide with to the Oklahoma taxpayers and Oklahoma citizens and Oklahoma decision makers, and it's won all the awards possible. So it's something that we really like people to get familiar with and use because it's a wonderful system.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brad, Jonathan, anything y'all want to mention before we get off?
No, I guess if I'm going to Vegas to bet on the summer in Oklahoma, I'm going to bet on dry and hot. I guess that's the way, if I had to bet, that's what I'm betting on, right?
I think you would always be safe on that. You might lose your cash every once in a while, but in most cases, dry and hot pretty much describes Oklahoma summer. So, but this one might be a little bit more possible due to the drought we already have in place.
Should we slap a breaking news banner on that tonight at 5 and 6?
Yeah.
Summer will be hot, brand new.
Yeah.
Might do a blog on that. Well, hey, Gary, thank you so much for coming on our show today. We'll probably ask you again sometime much later into the year, see what we have as we get closer into the wintertime. But thanks so much. We'll send you some goodies in the mail. So thanks for coming on our show today.
You bet. I'm glad to be on anytime.
You do a great job.
Thanks.